Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the hidden forces that really drive financial markets. We're going to look at the powerful engines that can create explosive growth, but also the crucial brakes that are supposed to prevent total chaos. So let's figure out what really makes this whole machine tick.
Okay, so let's just dive right in with a big question. When you look past the daily headlines and the stock tickers, what's really going on under the hood? What are those invisible forces that can turn a small market tremor into a full-blown earthquake? And, what keeps the whole system from just flying apart?
The best way to think about it is like this. The market is a really powerful machine, and it's driven by two kinds of competing forces. On one side, you've got your magnifying factors. That's the engine, the accelerator, the stuff that just makes everything bigger and faster. And on the other side, you have the frictional factors. Those are the brakes, the safety systems, designed to slow things down and keep it all under control. So let's start with one of the biggest magnifying factors out there, leverage. You can think of this as the gas pedal on that financial engine. It's what allows a pretty small amount of force, or in this case capital, to create a massive amount of acceleration.
So what is leverage really? Well, in its most common form, it's basically the art of using other people's money to make your own money work way, way harder for you. You're increasing the size of your bet, which is great because it amplifies your potential gains. But, and you can't forget this part, it also amplifies your potential losses just as much. Let's walk through a super common example. Imagine you're buying a house for $200,000. Now, you're not paying that all yourself, right? You put down 20%, which is $40,000 of your own cash. The rest of it, the other $160,000, that's borrowed from the bank. That's your mortgage. So right there, you're leveraged 5-to-1. For every single dollar of your own money that you put in, you're now controlling $5 worth of that house. Now check this out. This is where the magic or the madness happens. Let's say the value of the home goes up by just 10% to $220,000. You decide to sell, you pay the bank back its $160,000, and what do you walk away with? A $20,000 profit. Now stop and think about that for a second. The house itself only went up by 10%, but your investment, your initial 40 grand, just made you 20 grand back. That's a 50% return on your money. That right there is the awesome power of leverage. This quote really nails it. Leverage is like time-lapse photography for your money. It just dramatically speeds up the final result. It can make a tiny bit of growth look huge really fast. But you have to remember, it's a double-edged sword. That camera speeds up the bad stuff, too. A 10% drop in the home's value could wipe out half of your investment just as quickly. Okay, so that's leverage. But there's another amplifier, and this one's a little wilder. It's called nonlinearity. If leverage is the gas pedal, you can think of nonlinearity as a turbocharger that suddenly kicks in out of nowhere. It's when a really small change in one thing creates a sudden, completely out of proportion change in something else. So take a look at this chart. This is a pretty standard relationship in the bond market. On the one hand, you have the bond's price, and on the other, its yield. And you could see it's a nice, smooth, predictable curve. As the yield changes a little, the price changes along a continuous path. There are no surprises here. It's kind of like gently pressing the accelerator. You know what you're going to get. But this chart, this is a whole different animal. This shows the payoff for something like a stock option. See that sharp corner? It looks like a hockey stick, right? As the underlying stock price moves, nothing happens. Nothing. And then bam! You hit a certain point, the strike price, and the value just explodes upwards. That's the turbo kicking in. It's an abrupt, game-changing moment that's totally different from that smooth curve we just saw. All right, so we've talked about the engine, the gas pedal, and the turbo. Now let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's talk about the brakes. These are the frictional factors, the real-world forces that create drag and are supposed to keep this powerful machine from just spinning completely out of control. You really can't understand how markets work if you don't understand friction. The two main braking forces are liquidity and regulation. And just like air resistance or friction in physics, they're the essential checks and balances that, in theory, prevent the entire system from just overheating and blowing up. So, how can you tell if a market has enough liquidity? Well, you look for a few key things. First is the bid-ask spread. That's basically the cost to do a trade. The smaller that gap, the better. Then there's trading volume. How much stuff is actually changing hands every day? More is always better. You also look at fungibility. How easy is it to swap one unit for another? A dollar bill is perfectly fungible. A house, not so much. And finally, market impact. If you try to sell a huge chunk of something, does the price totally tank? The less it moves, the more liquid it is.
And then, of course, there's regulation. This is the official rule book, and it's a super important safety system. It forces companies to be transparent, like requiring bond trades to be reported within minutes. It creates real accountability with laws like Sarbanes-Oxley, and it tries to stop system-wide disasters by stress testing the biggest banks and tightening lending rules so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
So what happens when these forces get completely out of whack? What happens when the engine, that combination of leverage and nonlinearity, just totally overpowers the brakes of liquidity and regulation? Well, that's how markets break. That's when you get a crash. The 2008 global financial crisis is just a perfect and tragic case study of this whole dynamic. First, the engine of leverage just ran completely wild with super easy mortgages. Then, the brake of liquidity completely failed. The market for all those mortgage products just froze. Nobody could sell at any price. And the result was a catastrophic crash of a system that was both massively over-leveraged and suddenly totally illiquid. And that, of course, led directly to the much tougher regulations we have today.
Look, understanding this machine, this push and pull between amplifiers and frictions, it really matters because it helps us see the patterns behind the booms and the busts. But it also leads us to this huge, ongoing question we all have to think about. As finance keeps innovating and creating even more powerful engines, how do we make absolutely sure that our brakes, our safety systems, are strong enough to keep up? Getting that balance right? Well, that's the whole game.